Welcome everyone to today's CFOLC special presentation, The Rise of Nearshore Outsourcing in a Post-COVID Era, Why Costa Rica is a Great Choice, presented by our sponsor, Oxus. My name is Angela Tice. I'm the National Membership Chair and Northeast Regional Director, so I will be helping to facilitate today's session. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we actually get started. You might have noticed that your lines are muted, and that's really so that there are no distractions. However, we certainly encourage your questions and your comments for today's discussion. So please feel free to type your question in the questions area, and we'll make sure to get those questions answered. We'll be monitoring that area so we can address your concerns. I know many of you have already sent in some questions, and we will take those into consideration. You will hear that being addressed as we go through the presentation today. And also, if you are a member of the CFO Leadership Council, you do receive 1 CPE for today's webcast. Now, to receive credit, you must be a current member, and you need to answer 4 of the 5 polling questions asked today. We will interrupt the discussion to bring those to you and give you a chance to answer. In order to answer the polling questions effectively, you must be logged into today's session. If you've dialed in and you want to receive CPE, you need to hang up and use the direct link provided to you at registration. So in other words, you need to be on a computer and answer the polling questions that way. Due to the current coronavirus crisis, the CFOLC has pivoted to help support our community, moving all of our live events online. So we really do hope that you'll take advantage and continue to connect with us. There's a full list of online programs on our website, and CPEs are offered to our current CFOLC members. We want to keep our friends and members connected, so if you're wondering how to become a member, connect with me after the webcast. We do have levels of, and it does start the day. Cool thing, if you want to get CPE and you join, you get CPE today. Finally, I just want to mention that most of our webcasts and virtual discussions are recorded so that our members can check in and either listen again or listen to those they may have missed. At this time, we do not offer CPE when you listen to the virtual recordings. And finally, when you're in that membership portal and you're checking out the recordings, there's also another area that perhaps you may not know about, and it's for our sponsor experts. Many of them have virtual offices where you can visit and find excellent information in a vast amount of areas, and you can reach out to them directly if you have specific questions or needs. If you have any questions about how to find that information, you can always reach out to our National Sponsor Relations Manager, Katie Todd, or your local marketing director who can help you navigate through that. We have so much going on in August, so I just want to let you know, if you've not signed up yet, there really is time. August 19th, we have Back to the Future, How Modernizing AP Can Recover Time, Money, and Control of Your Business. August 24th, The Power of Inclusive Leadership. And finally, August 27th, A Healthier Bottom Line, Direct Primary Care Emerging as a Leading Strategy for Employers to Control Healthcare Costs. So we hope that you join us in those. I'm sure you'll find value, just as you're going to find value today from the people that I'm going to introduce to you right now. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. John Butler, he's the founder, Strategy Shore LLC, and Eric Libros comes back to us. He's the Senior Managing Director of Business Transformation at Oxus. And we also have Fabiana Corridor, who is the Senior Marketing Manager, and she's going to be facilitating the conversation today. So once I hand it off to Eric, we'll get started. But John brings an array of experiences accumulated over 30 years in the global shared services outsourcing and sourcing industries, having led the setup of both offshore in Thailand and India and nearshore delivery centers like Mexico and Peru. As an outsourcer and as a consultant, he brings a comprehensive real-world perspective while advising organizations around the world on their back office model strategies. And Eric also brings more than 30 years experience in the shared service strategy, back office optimization, and business process outsourcing areas. He joined Oxus in 2002 and since led the establishment of their Nearshore Shared Services Center in Costa Rica in 2010 and launched their intelligent automation practice in 2016. His perspective as both longtime business advisor and operator provides a unique real-world perspective to his clients. And I want to say thank you to both of you for coming on and offering out this special presentation. I know our members have asked us to help them find some real solutions to challenges they've faced, especially in the last few months. And I'm sure they'll gain great insight from what you will be sharing today. So with Eric, I'm going to hand it to you at this point.
Great, thank you, Angela, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. In today's session, we're going to be discussing the emergence of the nearshore outsourcing model as an alternative to the offshore model that's really existed for almost 20 years. And we're going to specifically focus on Costa Rica, which has long been considered the #1 destination for nearshore operations. I'm also excited to share the stage with John Butler, who's going to participate with me in a panel discussion on some of the key topics, such as the pros and cons of the various outsourcing options, nearshore, offshore, onshore. And we're going to share our experiences on how to make outsourcing work more effectively. But first, let's just talk about how the current COVID situation has helped to accelerate the push for cost and operational efficiency in business operations. Clearly, and some of these statistics bear this out, we are dealing in some pretty unprecedented times. The U.S. economy just reported its worst period ever in Q2. That's worse than the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, worse even than the Great Depression in the 1930s. And this has really created a push on business executives to focus heavily on cost containment and cash management type of initiatives. But what's also happening is we're seeing our operating models change right in front of our eyes in real time as companies transition from these large centralized operations to more remote operations with work from home as its central element. While this has happened as a result of the pandemic, how many of us expect this to be temporary? I think the old adage that if it ain't broke, you're probably not going to want to fix it is really in play here. And most organizations, as you can see from this statistic, are planning to make work from home a permanent part of the operations. So this has really brought outsourcing front and center into the thinking of many business executives, along with that already growing push that's been around for a couple of years now to increase the levels of automation in the organization to drive cost, efficiency, scale, etc. But what you're really seeing is with the pandemic, this has changed the whole thinking about relying less on individual people, less on locations, and more on process capabilities, technologies, and really having to effectively work in a remote operation. So if remote operations is going to become the new normal, why not consider outsourcing as part of your operating model? And if you're going to consider outsourcing, what are the advantages of a nearshore option? That's what we're going to be exploring today in the webinar. And that brings us to our first polling question. Has the current situation changed your perspective on outsourcing? So if you can take a few moments to kind of look at that and respond accordingly. The options are yes, I'm more open to outsourcing. No, I don't see myself outsourcing. I always believed in outsourcing and it's working well for me. And I believe in outsourcing, but my current model is not working.
That's great, Eric. And they're answering and collecting those answers, and I'll share those as soon as we collect them. We'll give them just a couple more seconds.
Thank you.
And just to add one point here, Eric, for the folks listening, please don't confuse outsourcing with offshoring. They're different, right? I can outsource my operations across the street. I've outsourced. Have I offshored? No, right? So again, outsourcing is a separate area from which shore you would do work from.
Great. And John and Eric, as you could see, 47% say yes, I am more open to outsourcing now. 10% say no. 35%, I've always believed in outsourcing, and 8%, I believe in outsourcing, but my current model is not working.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. And just one thing for the folks who said no, I invite you to go to strategyshore.com in the hot topic section and have a look at the blog on outsourcing explained, and you may change your mind.
So let's kind of move forward and talk about, if you're going to consider outsourcing, how do you really make it right? And then how does Nearshore play into all of that? That's what we'll explore right now. So let's first talk about the whole concept of outsourcing, as John had mentioned. It really emerged as a byproduct of the shared services strategy that started in the late 1980s into the 1990s, when organizations started to come together and bring their operations under a more centralized location, trying to get synergies, cost efficiencies, and operational efficiencies by bringing things together. But what happened was, when you did it back then, you really didn't have the options of going offshore. The infrastructure that existed in most of the other markets were very limited, both in terms of talent, power, telecommunications, etc. So you started to see shared services centers crop up, but they were really happening for the most part in the regions that the companies were operating in. So, for example, if you were in North America, you were likely going to build something potentially in a low-cost market in the U.S. Then we had the emergence of the Asia market, which started happening in the early to mid 2000s, and really that was a byproduct of the Y2K initiative and companies, starting to push that work offshore. And then they saw that that model started to work, so they started to build an operating model that took other functions, broader IT play, customer service, finance and accounting, kind of a late player to the outsourcing world, but something that you started to see. And so what you saw with that Asia-based model was you had significantly lower cost than what you were seeing in the U.S. operation, but some of the challenges with it started to emerge. The challenges of the time zone differences, language differences, cultural differences. It made the interaction, the collaboration, the kind of the day-to-day operation to become a little bit more troublesome, and there was some levels of frustration with the way the model was operating. Then emerged kind of another option to the Asia-based model, which is nearshore. Now, nearshore really is dependent upon where you're sitting. So if you're in Europe, nearshore is not going to be Latin America, it's going to be in Eastern Europe. And if you're sitting in the Americas, in North America, then likely it will be a Latin American option. But regardless of where you're sitting, at the end of the day, the drivers that people were looking for were geographic proximity, time zone compatibility. So what that meant basically is you were working essentially the same time zones as your staff was. You didn't have to deal with that overnight issue, whether or not you're working with off hour staff, or whether the things had to wait until the next day. The nearshore option kind of eliminated that, and the geographic proximity made it much easier to work together, to travel to each other's locations, and to work within each other's operations. That really started to improve the communication, the collaboration, etc. Now, you saw lower costs, but typically those costs were not going to be as low as the offshore Asia-based model if you were looking in Latin America or even in Eastern Europe. So there was a lower cost, but the cost, compared to US, but not necessarily overall compared to Asia. What you started to see, however, were other strong benefits beyond the geographic and the time zone. You started to have the availability of a large and somewhat fairly experienced workforce in the market, so you could tap into and potentially upgrade talent by going into the markets that you were looking at in a nearshore option. Stronger cultural affinity, definitely stronger language skills, particularly in certain markets within nearshore. Comparatively, a lower turnover than you would see typically in the Asia-based model. But I think one of the biggest benefits also came as a result of the push towards building out the infrastructure in, for example, Latin America. So as I mentioned, in the 1990s, it didn't exist, but by the mid-2000s, Latin America's infrastructure became one of its strengths. And you started to see strong power, strong telecommunications infrastructure that allowed companies to come in and take advantage of that. Even today, the Asia-based markets have some challenges with that. There's still a lot of areas that have power issues, and even some of the telecommunications issues. You've seen it in the current COVID crisis, where when some of the Asia organizations tried to go to a work from home model, the infrastructure that existed, not necessarily at the corporate offices, but at the home offices of the people who needed to make that transition, or it wasn't necessarily as robust enough as what it was needed. So that presented a challenge, and it still does to a certain extent. You really don't see that in Latin America. Major investments have built out that infrastructure. And so as a result, over the last probably 10 years, Latin America has emerged as a destination for North America, and it now represents almost 30% of the top 25 global outsourcing destinations. So if we're looking at outsourcing and nearshore as a benefit, how do we what are really the advantages of it and how do we make it work more effectively? So I like to kind of divide this into two buckets. One is what I like to call traditional outsourcing, and then the other one is what I like to call outsourcing that works. So it's not necessarily just a nearshore issue, but it is a difference in the operating model and how it should work. So in traditional outsourcing, you go back to the early days, it was primarily driven by labor arbitrage, and people were focused on, reducing costs in their current operations. But to make outsourcing really work well, it needs to be about more than cost savings. There are other drivers that are available, whether it's flexibility, focus, scale. You're going to get the cost savings as a given. It's there. Okay, and you just have to think about what are the other benefits you need to achieve. What are you trying to accomplish to make outsourcing work more effectively? Another concern in traditional outsourcing has been what I've called the black box model, where you kind of send things out to the outsourcing organization. Things happen and you get a result back, and there's not a lot of visibility or control over how those things happen and what went into it. Well, in outsourcing that works, you're going to have a much more connected, collaborative organization, leveraging some of the more collaboration type technology tools and automation and best practices that will drive higher levels of performance. So the quality concerns that you're often thinking about and experiencing should be improved upon, and you should have better visibility, better interaction, better productivity as a result of the tools that the provider can often bring. And it's a much more collaborative model that actually, the way we like to phrase it, serves as an extension of your team rather than a remote team working somewhere else. This is all being managed and driven by those time zone and geographic differences that I talked about, as well as the language skills and being close to home and working on similar schedules with technology, with improved communication. That's how you define outsourcing that works. So within the nearshore, go ahead,
Eric,
John.
if I can just jump in on your last slide, I think you're selling yourself short, because ultimately the costs are lower using a nearshore provider such as Oxus. There are lots of things that you mentioned that, a lot of CFOs look at a shiny, flashy rate card and their eyes gloss over and they think, oh my God, we've got to send everything to an Asian area. And while there may be an initial lower rate card or lower cost of service, what doesn't get factored in, and the people who do this certainly don't want to talk about it, is the cost of poor quality, the costs associated with high attrition and turnover, the costs associated with, learning to just accept good enough, as opposed to people who are working real time all the time and working with you. I wrote again, another blog at strategyshore.com. Nobody gets fired for outsourcing to India, but they should. I got a lot of fan mail from that one, I'll tell you, but mine is an independent perspective from Eric's, and everything he's saying here is absolutely correct, but don't sell yourself short, Mr. Libros, because ultimately the costs are there in working with nearshore as opposed to far shore. Turn it back.
And I didn't ask him to say any of that, so thank you, John. Appreciate it. So let's talk about what we really mean by nearshore from a destination perspective. So if you look at Latin America, it's a big area, okay? And there's many, many, many countries that reside in there. Well more than 40 are considered part of that whole region. And so I use a definition of nearshore as really something that you can get to with relative ease. Time zone definitely needs to be a factor, but for most of Latin America, time zone isn't necessarily the issue, but there is an issue in terms of travel. So if you're trying to get to, for example, Brazil or Argentina or even Uruguay, which is considered a very, high talent market, the problem is it's going to take you 8, 10, sometimes even more hours, depending on where you're coming from, to get there. So by definition, I don't consider that nearshore. To me, nearshore should be, I can get there in, no more than 3-4 hours, 5 hours tops, and it's relatively easy to get to. The other factor, is if you look at who fits into that bucket of being easy to travel to. So you have the Caribbean as a location for certain nearshore activities. And again, it could be considered a nearshore destination by the travel element. But what you typically don't find in those markets is the scale that you need, sometimes the talent, sometimes the language that you need, sometimes the infrastructure, sometimes all of the above. that's available in those markets. Typically what we see for Caribbean is more of a niche market. You see some customer service there, you see some specific skill sets, but what you're really not seeing is the broad finance and accounting, IT, customer service play across all of those functions in those markets. So at the end of the day, and I do this all the time when I work with organizations, you kind of come up with what I call the usual suspects. And the usual suspects are Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia. Those are really the three main destinations that fit that nearshore profile. So let's compare and contrast each of them real briefly and give you a sense of those markets. I'll start with Costa Rica. So Costa Rica for many, many years has been considered the #1 nearshore Latin American destination. And a lot of it is due to the fact that it's already well established, has a very mature business services sector. It started in the late 1990s, early 2000, when companies like Intel and Procter & Gamble entered the market, and they started to build up a business services sector that's been expanding to this day. So you have a very large presence of multinational companies, more than 170 that are already well established in that market. A lot of it's driven by the strength of the education and the multilingual skills that exist in the market. Virtually everyone in business services speaks English as well as Spanish, and many other languages. We'll talk a little more about that. And then the government itself has done a tremendous amount to really make this process a lot easier. They've really built out a strong infrastructure in terms of supporting companies looking to come into the market. They've created incentives for companies to come into the market. And they've really set up a structure where they help you through this process. Even, the labor laws are flexible enough so that while Costa Rica has its own set of holidays, most of the workers are used to working US schedules, US holiday schedules, for example. So in a lot of cases, you don't have people disappearing for a holiday that doesn't exist in the US and you need your people working, but they're not there because there are holidays that are local to that country. You do see that in a lot of these other markets. Now, the challenges with Costa Rica, frankly, it's a small country, it's a small market. That drives the cost up. The other thing that drives the cost up with Costa Rica is the fact that it's very closely tied to the US economy. So as a result, you have the benefit, you have a very stable economic market, very stable political market. You don't have a lot of the volatility that you see in some of these other countries, but you also don't get the benefit of these big devaluations that you see in other markets, but you also don't get the impact of when it goes the other way, right? So you kind of know what you're going to get in Costa Rica. It just tends to run at a higher cost than, for example, Mexico and Colombia. Now, if you look at Mexico, which is, the second largest labor pool in the region, it definitely has low costs. Those low costs have been accelerated by this COVID situation and a recent devaluation in their currency. So it's dropped dramatically, even more. So that's driving costs even lower. And you do have a pretty large multinational presence in Mexico, but you have challenges in that market that give people concern. There's challenges politically. A lot of companies are leery of the new, this relatively new government that exists in the country. It's not necessarily one that's very business friendly. There are security concerns in Mexico, more so than certain other markets. And the ease of doing business is accelerated by the fact that there's no real government entity that supports bringing in bringing companies into the market. There used to be, similar to what Costa Rica has, a government entity that really helped facilitate this. A couple of years ago, they shut it down, so you're kind of on your own trying to get into the market. So it presents some challenges. Now, the one that's emerging is Colombia. Colombia is a large labor force. It has low costs, similar to Mexico, and similar to Mexico in terms of the recent devaluations. And they're considered a very strong quality labor force. And the government is focusing very heavily on trying to get companies into the market and doing a very good job of that. The concern with Colombia and what they're trying to overcome is the history and what people saw, back in the 80s and 90s with, Pablo Escobar and all of the drug trade and the cartels. Well, that doesn't really exist anymore. It's much more stable, but a lot of people don't know it. So the government is doing a lot to try to help facilitate companies coming in. So it's becoming a destination, but it does have some concerns. Language skills are not as readily available, particularly if you're focusing on English, as you see in Colombia, Costa Rica, or even Mexico. Colombia is about 10 times the size of Costa Rica in terms of population, but if you look at what the population that's considered bilingual, it's 10%. So in essence, that bilingual skill set, if you're looking for it, is essentially the size of the market is eliminated, and it almost becomes comparable to the population available in Costa Rica, because just about everyone in business services speaks English. Labor flexibility, a little bit of a concern. They don't have the same flexibility that Costa Rica does. And then, frankly, it's much more of an Americas-based market, not necessarily one that's used to working with the U.S. So for those reasons, Costa Rica has become the #1 destination, and it's where people, typically first look. But these are the three that you'll typically see most of the traction when you're considering nearshore. Which brings us now to our second polling question. Do you agree with the advantage of nearshore versus offshoring? Angela, I'll pass it off to you.
Fantastic, and I just launched that. So audience, if you could answer quickly, we can get back to the presentation and then also get to some of the questions that you've all asked. And as soon as we gather that, I will share that with everyone, and then we'll get back to you. Couple more seconds. Couple more seconds. They're listening to me. They're answering more quickly. Thank you, audience. Great, I'm going to close this now and I'll share this with everyone. So it looks like we have 52% that says strongly agree, 33% agree, 16% are neutral, and both disagree and strongly disagree are 0. So that's good.
Yeah, so that's great that people are actually starting to recognize these benefits. I mean, they're pretty obvious. The benefits are there. It's a question of whether the model makes any sense for you. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive in Costa Rica. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and this information will be available in our off our website where you can download it. So you'll have a lot more information there. But let's kind of dive into Costa Rica a little bit. So as I mentioned, it's definitely considered the #1 destination. We already talked about the language skills. I'll provide more details around that, and the effectiveness of the education system. So Costa Rica in 1948 abolished its army, and they invested in healthcare and they invested in education. The byproduct of that is you have a very young, very educated, English-speaking workforce coming into the market with strong literacy skills, foundational knowledge in various disciplines like accounting, IT, even customer service. They focus on those skills, and they actually teach it in the high school programs that companies, the people are working in. So when they come out into the market, they actually have a foundational knowledge of the various disciplines that they want to go into. We already talked about the time zones and the cultural affinity, but what you really have there is political stability, strong infrastructure, very safe market, and a very strong educational system that's pushing people out into the market to help provide that workforce that we're talking about. And so what you've seen is over the 20 years that I've talked about, a significant growth in the business services market. So in 2000, when the market was very young and you only had a few companies, literally 6, in the market providing these services, there were about 1,000 people doing it. So as of 2018, there were almost 66,000. I would say that number is now into the 70s because there's continuous growth in the market, and the number of companies went from 6 to more than 170. And what's happened is Costa Rica really has made this a major focus of their economy, and you're seeing that the exports of business services and where it sits within the GDP of the country has really grown tremendously. So on this chart here, the blue line represents essentially business services, and the gold line represents agriculture. So as you can see, in 2000, agriculture was much more of a dominant factor within the GDP, and business services was essentially a blip. Over the next 10 years, those lines started to converge, and if you look now where it is that business services is become a stronger part of the GDP than agriculture has. So clearly the country is making investments and focusing on this and pushing not only people into the market, but providing them the infrastructure, the skills, and the education needed to be effective. And I mentioned more than 170 multinationals. Well, here are a lot of the companies that you see. There's more than this, but there's a bunch of names that you'll clearly recognize and see these as very well-known companies, almost like a who's who of organizations reside in the market today. And why is this important? It's important because when you go into the market, I know that I can hire people who know how to work in a US or a multinational type of environment. They're experienced at it. They understand it from a technical skill set perspective. For example, they understand US GAAP, but they also understand the pace, the culture, the communication style of working with a US operation. So they understand how to operate and navigate that very effectively because they've been doing it for all these many years in these types of organizations. So I can hire people with that level of experience, and quite frankly, when you go into the market, what you're often finding, particularly compared to some of the lower level positions in your organization, a talent upgrade based on the fact of the experience that they're bringing.
And you know, Eric, in a formal role as a shared services advisor with a former company, a lot of concerns that we would hear from some clients were, well, if everybody is there, maybe I need to go somewhere else. And it's like, well, everyone's there because it works. Everyone is there because things are going well for all of the reasons you just mentioned. So I would say, if you're really that worried about shaving pennies that much and being penny wise, pound foolish, just look at what everyone else has done in the region and think about that when you consider, okay, do I need to retrain everyone to US business customs as you just mentioned? Or why don't I go somewhere where people already know that and we can just skip that hurdle and get busy right away?
Right, and bring those language skills that are what makes Costa Rica stand out compared to the other.
Exactly.
And Eric,
speaking of language skills, so you have here, as you can see from this statistic, almost 80% of all the services being provided out of Costa Rica are provided in English across the board, all different areas. These services, are because a lot of it's supporting Americas-based operations, North America, Canada, etc. But what's interesting about the market is that it's also a market that has strong language skills beyond just English and Spanish. You see very strong presence of Portuguese, of French, some of the other European languages, German, Dutch, Italian, and even a bunch of the Asian languages. We actually support, a small footprint, but we support Mandarin out of our operation for certain clients that needed it. So you can find great language skills in the market. English, definitely, but other languages are available as well. And it really makes Costa Rica a great destination from that perspective.
Eric, since we are talking about Portuguese, I wanted to bring a question from our audience, and it's about Brazil. So it says, due to the extreme complexity that Brazil has in terms of taxes, would you recommend more of a local outsourcing solution for Brazil, while a nearshore solution would fit better for other LATAM countries? Or do you think that Brazil could actually be served out of Costa Rica?
It's a great question, and and one that always comes up when you're dealing with that market. And I will tell you that the first people who tell you need to keep Brazil in Brazil are Brazilians. It's definitely a market that has complexity, and the taxes make it complex. But I will tell you that I've had multiple experiences, not just in our center, but in setting up shared services operations for other companies where you're able to migrate Brazil into other markets and make it work. Yes, it's complex, and Brazil tends to be very resistant. I'm being very honest here to this type of transition. But you can overcome it, and it can work. You really have to look at it and decide, does it make sense? Is there enough of a labor play? Is there enough of a synergy or operational benefits that you're going to get from it? At the end of the day, that's the factor, is not whether or not it can work, it's whether or not it makes sense.
And being also smart about what you keep local in country, because of course you're always going to keep, those more key functions for taxes and local statutory requirements, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to do that. When you move out of those markets, you still need local presence for certain activities. And as you can see here, Costa Rica does pretty much everything back office wise, from contact center to finance and accounting, IT, human resources, and even some of the digital skill sets that are part of the emerging technology footprint in the markets. But when you design this, there still is going to be a need to keep certain things local because of the way you have to interact with tax agencies or some other regulatory requirements. So it's never going to be 100% move everything out and leave nothing behind. That just doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
And
Yeah,
Eric,
Brazil is hard, basically, just from my non-Oxus experience. Brazil is hard. And as you just mentioned, Eric, if I have to have something there, fine, I will. But Brazil, Russia, China would never be at the top of my list of outsourcing destinations.
Mhm.
As you mentioned, just the tax laws are incredible to work through.
Mhm. So Eric, if you can go back one slide, because I think that we need to clarify a question. They said from this slide, it looks like finance and accounting is still not a majority of the skill sets. Less than 75% is not very high. And I think that we need to clarify that basically the bars, what it means is out of the finance and accounting services that are provided out of Costa Rica, approximately 60% are provided in English.
Right.
Okay.
This is not to say that's what's
Yeah.
available in terms of talent. That's what's being provided today. Okay. So if you think about it, a lot of what you see in Costa Rica is not for the it's not for the US, it's for the Americas as well. So when you go back to these companies, some of them have global operations, some of them have Americas, including US and Canada, but some of them are just specific to the Latin American markets. That's why you see this percentage not as high as some of the others, because at the end of the day, the services that are being provided are not necessarily being done in English. It doesn't mean that the skill set doesn't exist.
Right, and most of these shared services in Costa Rica are multifunction, meaning that on average they are providing not just finance and accounting, but typically HR, supply chain, customer service, a portion of IT. But typically finance and accounting is the first function that it's been migrated. So definitely the bulk of those logos that you saw in the other slide are mainly doing finance and accounting work.
So let's shift
Yeah.
into, what can I expect in terms of savings from Costa Rica? Because I talked about the fact that the market is, higher cost than some of the other markets. So I want to first talk about, how do you get savings? So typically from an outsourcing perspective in Costa Rica, you can expect to see about anywhere from 30 to 50% savings. And I'm going to give you some specific examples about that in a second. But I wanted to talk about really what your roadmap is in terms of savings. And it really isn't just about labor cost. There are other factors. And when you make this type of transition, your opportunities exist to do two things. One is to restructure the organization. So typically organizations kind of devolve. They're not necessarily built on best practices. And what I often see are, span of control issues where you have managers to staff ratios that are very tight, and that's not a best practice necessarily. You also see certain roles being performed in organizations that you're essentially paying more than you really need to for the role, not because the demand of it, but because frankly tenure, people are sitting and doing the same job for quite a number of years, and you just end up paying them more year over year because of COLAs and things like that. So at the time of the transition, you have the opportunity to fix all of that. And what we typically see is you're fixing your structure and gaining another 10 to 20% just by right-sizing the management structure, re-leveling the roles, and paying appropriately for the jobs that you're doing at the levels that you need. The other thing is this is an opportunity to bring in some innovation, some technology, and drive productivity and efficiency that way. So, if you look at how you want to make this transition, yes, you're going to get your labor savings. Remember, I talked about it's not just about that. It's because you have opportunities in other buckets to drive additional cost savings, anywhere from 10 to 20% across the board. So you could literally take that 30% and make it 70 or 80% if you're doing it right. So there's a number of ways to get there. And specifically, if you want to see what some of the savings look like across certain markets, back in 2019, we issued this report where we compared U.S. labor costs with Costa Rica labor costs in an outsourcing model. And as you can see, there's some pretty significant dollar savings that you can still achieve. So to John's point, we're not selling ourselves short. The dollars are there. They may not be quite as dramatic as what you're seeing in an Asia market, but you're getting a lot of savings still, and you're getting these other nearshore benefits. So from the standpoint of certain markets, for example, in Miami, where I sit, it's 30 to 40% average savings. That translates into 20 to 30,000 a head. Whereas if you're in New York, the numbers are going to be higher because the market costs more. So 40 to 50%, and in some of the West Coast markets even higher than that. So you could see 40, 50, even 60,000 a head savings is available in the Costa Rica market. Those are significant dollars that can really reduce your costs very quickly.
And I want to jump on, Eric. That's that initial rate card, that initial cost, and over time, right, these other intangibles of attrition, of your own employees' attrition, who get fed up with having to work with a far shore provider, and just there's a long list of things, again, out on the website. But these numbers are great, but I think they're actually better than you're letting on to, because they're, again, it's just so much easier to do this work from nearshore.
Agreed. If you want to get more details on this survey, it's available on our website at this link. Again, you'll get this. You have the opportunity to download this, so you can get access to that. And that brings us to our next poll question. What would be your main driver for considering outsourcing in general, not just from a nearshore perspective? So are you looking to reduce costs, accelerating your digital transformation and performance improvement, increasing flexibility, agility, and business continuity, access to talent, increasing focus? Angela, back to you.
Great, and I launched that, so people are answering. And again, audience, if you can do that quickly, we can get back to your queue questions as well. I know some of you have submitted some more, so we'll get to those as well as the original ones. Couple more seconds, and we will get the answers and share that with everyone. Okay, I'm going to close that now and share the results. Reduced costs is 41%, 12% say accelerate digital transformation and performance improvement, 16% say increase operational flexibility, agility, and business continuity, 10% access to talent, and 20% increase my team's focus on higher value activities. So back to you.
Yeah, this is very consistent with what we see. Cost is always in play. You're going to get the cost. You want to get that, but it's these other factors that really should be part of your thinking when you're making this transition. It really gives you a significant benefit in those areas, and one that sometimes you can't even calculate the benefit of that in terms of dollars, but it's significant in terms of how you can operate more effectively. And I wanted to close up the Costa Rica section real quick with, so how has Costa Rica done in terms of the world of COVID? We've seen this all over the world becoming a significant issue. So what's happened in Costa Rica over the past number of months? Well, like the rest of the world, Costa Rica pretty much shut down in the middle of March. And basically the country, while they have seen cases come into the market, they've done extremely well in terms of managing that. The death rate is one of the lowest in the world compared to many other countries. A lot of this is a testament to the market, to the healthcare coverage that exists in the country and how strong that is. But a lot of the effectiveness of this transition is really due to the infrastructure that we were talking about earlier. We literally had to shut down our center within 2 days to push everybody to work from home. Now, we'd always had the strategy of work from home, but did I ever try to test it in a global scale like this? Absolutely not. The little pockets of testing don't really tell you what has to happen. So we all held our breath, switched to work from home, and we did it in March, which was right before a quarter-end close. So not only did we have to switch to that model, but we had to do it in a time when companies were looking to close the books on a quarter. And really, you know how that goes. You want to get it done in time. You don't want any delays. And even more important during this period of time, to get your numbers in place. And frankly, it was done without a hitch. Very easy to do, very straightforward. We've seen actually in a lot of cases, productivity's even improved because, quite frankly, you have some pretty bad traffic conditions in Costa Rica, and people, instead of doing 2-hour commutes, were experiencing, having much more time and flexibility and relief from stress and be able to work more effectively. So it's worked extremely well, and the country's managed it well, to the point that the United Nations has actually recognized Costa Rica as one of the leaders in managing the COVID response. And with that, I'm going to switch gears and let's turn it to our panel discussion and open it up to some of the questions that I know the audience is asking.
Yeah.
Bobby, I'll turn it over to you.
So what I'll do, John, is that I'll ask a couple of questions here, and then we can go through the topics that we had planned for. But I think this is an important question to address. Do you find that clients are concerned about diverting jobs from the U.S. economy? And in general, they're asking, do you think that, the U.S. need the jobs more than ever? Like, what's your argument to moving those jobs out of the country?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with that one. So, when I think of automation, right, that's about eliminating a certain type or a certain level of work and moving things to a more efficient means of production. And the same thing with outsourcing, what I would call maybe some lower level functions. The benefit of that is people moving up in the value chain and working on more thoughtful work, more challenging work, new work that didn't exist prior to outsourcing these jobs. And it's a very good point, right? And as someone who's been involved in outsourcing for 30 years almost, it's one that I hear all the time. And it's we can't stop the world from changing. This is the way to handle these types of jobs that, again, no longer require such a high level of education. And with our own workforce, yes, that's a challenge. What do we do with those folks? I'm not a fan of laying them off. I'm a fan of finding new, more meaningful things for them to do. What are those jobs? I don't know. It varies by industry. But I think this is unfortunately a necessary thing we have to do. Just like when the tractor came, right? Everybody that was in the field before had different jobs, different things to do, right? Was using tractors the right thing? Yeah. Did we survive? Yes. Did things get better? Yes. But there are some painful points along the way. I think, Eric, you've probably got something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is a tough question, and we all deal with it all the time. But I believe in a couple of things. Number one is that the operating model that exists today, this is not something that's going away. It exists. Your competitors are doing it. Your other companies are doing it. You're going to have to look at the market and say, do I not take advantage of this situation, or and kind of ignore what my competitors are doing, or do I take advantage of it and work alongside them? So it's a tough call, and not one that's easy. But honestly, and let's talk honestly here. Before all this situation happened, the type of jobs we're talking about, some of the clerical jobs, accounts payable clerks, and some order processing clerks, and some of those positions, there were not a lot of people in this country who liked doing them. You didn't get that people looking at this as a great career move. You didn't get people looking at this as something that they really enjoyed doing. They did it because they had to do it, and you saw attrition, you saw performance issues. When you go to these markets, it's a very different perspective. They're looking at it as a career opportunity. They're looking at it as a step up. So to John's point, you're going to move some of these jobs out, and I'm not saying that you're doing it to basically let everybody go, but people need to adjust and change their skill sets and become more valuable to the organization than just processing an invoice. If you're able to do that, and people can do it, you've seen it as technology emerges, people adjust, like John said. So with the advent of these type of things happening, people should focus on reskilling, improving, and bringing more value to the organization, not just maintaining an existing level of transactional perspective.
Thank you. So this next question, Eric, I think it's probably more for you within finance and accounting. Are internal controls impacted at the corporation as a result of nearshoring business services, for instance, approval of transactions, segregations of duties, reconciliations, biddings, in terms of local internal controls?
Not if you design it properly. So the way a design of an outsourcing model should work, or any type of remote operation, is it needs to be designed around your existing controls and infrastructure. You shouldn't design something that disenables controls. It should support and drive those controls. So the approvals should still have the same structure. The levels of approvals, the segregation of duties should still have the same structure. If you're building a collaborative model, certain elements of the job can be done in an outsourced model, and then you get to another point in time, and there's a handoff back to the organization, for example, an approval. And then it comes back to the outsourcer to finish the job. If it's designed properly, it'll work very effectively. We have not seen controls being impacted. As a matter of fact, in some cases, you have better controls because you have a lot more structure, visibility, technology in some cases that help manage that.
And contrast that with doing that work offshore, right? I need to find out how I can trademark the term real time all the time, but that's what you get with Nearshore. No one has to get up at 3:30 a.m., whether it's your offshore team or you, to approve something so that work can move through the pipeline. You're all working, lock, sync, and step, and it's just easier done Nearshore.
Mm-hmm. So, John, let's talk a little bit about captive versus outsourcing, because I think that a lot of companies that are here may be thinking, okay, why don't I just go directly and open a shared services in Costa Rica? Like, why would it make more sense to go through a BPO provider like Oxys, right? What would you say to them?
So again, I keep directing everybody to the hot topic section on strategyshore.com. There is an article about which is better, captive versus outsourcing. And I think what happens is a lot of times, again, people get penny wise, pound foolish. Boy, that service provider is making money, and they need to, but they're making money, and I want to get that money. I want to keep it for myself. And what people kind of are short-sighted about is, is your brand known in this region? Oh, it's not. Do you want to go work for Acme Corporation? Who are they? No, right? So you're going to overpay to hire talent, number one. Number two, have you thought of, well, you need a legal presence in the country. You actually need a recruiting team in that country who, by the way, understands the culture, who understands what are the motivators for people, right? So all of that stuff, it's built into your service provider's rates, because they have one team that's doing that across multiple clients. But you want to hire your own team to do that just for you, and you're not going to grow to be a 5,000 person operation. I don't think that makes sense. The other thing that a former client of mine, a big bank in America, was really, really smart about doing was using service providers to prove out a geography. So if they hadn't been there before, they would use a service provider to go in and stand it up, test it out, make sure things work, and then after several years consider, does it make sense for us to set up? And I don't like the term captive. No one wants to work for a captive. I would work for a global in-house center, not a captive. Please make sure you refresh your terminology on that, everyone. But again, let a service provider prove out the geography before you send all of your work there. And the last thing that no one ever thinks about, right? Imagine your pyramid within your company, and you're going to take one portion of that and outsource it. Well, think of the career path for the people who are working there, right? There's only so far up in the smaller triangle that they can go. The next jobs are kind of back onshore at headquarters. How are you going to manage that? If you don't, guess what? All those people that you overpaid for are going to quit as they go to the next location, and you're going to have to manage that attrition because you don't have a career path planned out for them. It makes so much more sense to use a service provider that is, that are professionals at doing that, at managing people's careers, moving people from project to project. You get the benefit of their additional experience, but you also don't suffer the pain of the high attrition levels that would come with the fact that you can't really offer, but so much in terms of career progression for those folks.
Yeah, and the other key thing that we see is that when you go through an outsourcing model, your one-time investment, it's much lower because you basically don't have to stand up the facilities and do all of that investment up front. So basically you get the savings much faster, and you can actually use those savings and invest them on automation, on robotic process automation, on digital transformation. So somehow you kind of like self-pay the improvements.
The other thing, and I'd like to add to that, is that this is not a mutually exclusive conversation. Captive and outsourcing can exist together. You know, the hybrid model, as we call it, is one that you're seeing more and more present in the marketplace. As a matter of fact, there was a statistic earlier in the presentation that talked about 61% of shared services organizations are going to take more advantage of outsourcing. So what you're seeing is this hybrid model that certain pieces go to an outsourcing provider, certain pieces stay. What's core, what's not, that's how you kind of divide it up. The other thing that drives this is scale. If you're a 50-person organization and you're looking to build a shared services, I would tell you it's probably going to cost you too much and it's going to be too difficult to pull off. You know, if you don't have a few hundred people, it's probably not even worth taking a look at it from a pure captive perspective, because you're, as John was saying earlier, you're not going to stand out in a market that, you know, where there's 500, 1,000 people in the center, and people are looking at that and saying, why do I want to work in this small organization? Captive or global service center, as John would want me to use the term, is one that needs a certain level of scale to be effective and to make the investment worthwhile. As we were talking about, that investment, building out a facility, can run into the millions of dollars. And if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that you're getting the true benefit. So hybrid is one that's really become a very important part of the equation, where it's a bit some outsourcing and some in-house.
Awesome.
Yeah, been there, done that. It ain't cheap.
So Eric, in terms of finance and accounting, a lot of people had questions about, okay, what exactly within finance and accounting should I feel comfortable on outsourcing? Do you want to maybe give your perspective based on what the clients are outsourcing to us?
Sure, I can talk about that, but I can also talk about, you know, my experience that goes beyond just doing the outsourcing, but working with shared services organizations for the past 20 years. So at the end of the day, I think it really has to come down to what is core to you and your business. So you can take certain functions and carve them up, and you might want to keep pieces of it. I would argue that anything that is very transactional in nature, you know, something like applying cash, something like doing a reconciliation or processing a journal entry that doesn't require a lot of judgment, or paying an invoice or processing an invoice. None of those things are necessarily going to be core to your business. It's not, it just has to be done. It has to be done well, and it has to be done in a fashion that, if you're going to do it through this model, is going to be at a lower cost than you're doing it today. So if you look at it from that perspective, there are pieces of every function that can clearly go. Accounting is the one that, you know, people have the most, you know, agita about, because, you know, they're concerned of the value and the importance of it. But a lot of accounting is transactional. Doing reconciliations is transactional. Most journal entry processing is transactional. A lot of what you're doing on the close is transactional in nature, and we do the entire suite of activities and close the books for our clients because they recognize the fact that it's transactional. What they want to focus on are the higher value, more strategic thinking things. When you get your financial results, it's what do I do with that information and how do I apply it to my business going forward? It's not about why it was my, you know, budget and actuals varied. What happened? That's something that I consider transactional that you can provide, that we can provide. But the analysis of taking that a step further and saying, what does this truly mean to my business? Financial planning and analysis, thinking about it. So this even involves changing how you do accounting. Accounting should not just be about reporting, it should be about helping the business decide what to do next. So in my mind, if you take away the what happened stuff and you just process the transactions, I would encourage people to to take that information and use that in a more strategic way to support the business. Also, an area that people tend to pull back on is where you're customer facing. So for example, we'll do a lot of work around the order to cash cycle, but potentially, you know, dealing with customers directly or even collections and doing some of the customer interaction are not something that some clients want us to do. Some are fine with it, but others kind of want to have that direct customer interaction. So you have to look at those functions, carve them up, decide what's strategic, what's not, what is, you know, more important in terms of dealing with customers or suppliers that are critical, and make those calls. But pretty much anything within those three areas, order to cash, procure to pay, and record to report, have elements that can be outsourced.
So John, for those that are thinking about potentially structuring an outsourcing relationship, what would you say are the key lessons learned and what should they be looking in their outsourcing provider now under this new, I guess, work from home model?
Right. Well, first of all, if you're on a call, webinar, Zoom, whatever, you're already working in the nearshore model. And I think we've seen over the past couple of months that this model does work. And unfortunately, it took COVID to bear it out, but we've seen, as we've spoken about previously, that the nearshore model is the work from home model. We're all same time, real time, all the time. But in terms of what to look for in an outsourcing provider, I've worked with several companies, and whether it's spirit of the contract or being a trusted partner, those are great things to say. But it's kind of hard. I get it. How am I going to know, is this service provider really going to work with me? I like good fences make good neighbors. I think good contracts make good outsourcing partners. So as you evaluate partners for different areas, you're finding the ones that are the top 5 in that area, and then going through an RFP or a questioning kind of situation where you understand, how do you respond to this? How would you respond to this, right? To different scenarios. Obviously, they need to have some scale. They need to have some presence in the market and be well known where they are. I want to see what they've done in the past and for whom. I want to have them let me schedule calls with some of their clients, so I can get an honest to goodness opinion from them, what works well and what doesn't. And don't say, what's your worst trait? I work too hard, I'm too dedicated. No, come on, let's go. We're past that. But to find out basically how well they work together. That's from the company itself. From the company itself, I would also look at locations, right? Am I going to be required to have some contingent of my team stay up all night to work with you offshore? Because what will happen, again, an uncounted cost is you're going to lose your own people. No one wants to stay up, and get up at 2:30, 3:30 to have that once a week conference call, and you'll drive up your own attrition. So again, look at where they are. And I'm a big fan, and with some of my biggest clients in the past, we've done pilot programs to prove it out, right? If you've never done outsourcing before, do a pilot program, right? I get it. You're scared. You don't want to put, everything in one basket. Do a pilot program, test it out, see what works, see what doesn't, and then work through those things, and then, continue on with the program. Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, I think we're up against the clock, so I'm not sure how much time we still have. I know there was another polling question. I don't know if, Angela, do we have time to still do that?
Eric and John, thank you so much. And Fabiana, I made sure to them quietly into that you were giving the audience.
Okay, you went behind our backs. That's fine.
We did. I did, and because it was better to hear what you were saying.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all for, and especially the audience, for staying on a couple minutes longer and joining us today. Audience, I really do hope you receive some valuable and practicable information. If you'd like to continue today's discussion, I encourage you to reach out to John or Eric. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any in-depth questions that you might have. And with that, again, Eric, John, Fabiana, thank you so much for your presentation today. I certainly learn something every time I listen to you, so thank you so much. This does conclude the presentation on the rise of nearshore outsourcing in a post-COVID era, why Costa Rica is a great choice. Stay safe and stay connected, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.